Hey Dad, have you ever failed? And I don't mean like in the last 10 minutes, because you probably have. If you're like me, you probably fail every day on some level. You might have failed big time. There may have been a big, giant mess up in your past. We've all failed. And if I say, have you ever failed, and you instantly think, well, no, just turn these videos off, stop watching, because like, we don't need you in our community wrecking the curve for the rest of us who fail regularly. One of the biggest failures in the Old Testament was also one of the biggest heroes of the Old Testament, and that's David, King David. When he failed, specifically with the reference I'm making is to Bathsheba, he sleeps with a lady who's not his wife, he has her husband murdered, he tries to cover it up, there's all this stuff he does that's just so dark and so bad. Then he writes, we believe, Psalm 51. And in Psalm 51, I want to read you a long stretch of it, because I want to help you see his heart after he failed. And you might wonder, why am I talking about failure from this particular spot? Well, let me tell you that before I read you the verse. When I was a kid, I umpired a lot of baseball, and it was kind of what I thought I was going to do with my adult life, is be a baseball umpire, and I loved it. I took pride in it. And one of the things you try to do as a baseball umpire is you tried to control the game. So you tried to assert your authority as early as you possibly could. You'd even sometimes call a meeting before the game, have the coaches come out, say, hey coaches, let's have a good game today. Here's what we're gonna do. And you just were trying to position yourself as the authority on the field. And one time I remember the shortest game I ever umpired was right on this field. Right on this field, I umpired a game. I think the game lasted about 8 minutes. And the reason the game lasted 8 minutes is because something went down. I don't remember, but there were people in these stands screaming and yelling, and they were out of line. There were players screaming and yelling out of that dugout. And I remember going to the coaches and going, hey coaches, we're not gonna tolerate this. This is insane, this is crazy. And they're like, you're just an umpire, get back. And I said, no, I'm the guy who says whether we play or not. And they're going, oh, what are you gonna do, cancel the game? And I said, as a matter of fact, yeah, I'll tell you what we're gonna do. This game's over, we're done. And I grabbed my other umpire, we walked out the ump gate, and the game was over. Like, I literally canceled a game in the top of the first inning. And I remember thinking back, I'm not sure I handled that very well. I don't think that was the way that, my ump mentors would have told me how to handle the game. I would consider that to be one of my greatest failures as an umpire. It was a bad game. Like, fortunately, at least it was a short game. I mean, we got that going for us. After we fail, what do we do? What do we do after we fail? Do we quit? Do we disqualify ourselves? Do we go, well, I guess I'll never umpire again since that went so bad? Well, that might work if you're a baseball umpire. It doesn't work if you're a dad. It doesn't work if you're a husband. You don't get to fail and then quit. That's just not how it works. So here's what David did. After he failed, we're reading in Psalm 51. I'm gonna pick it up at verse 7. I'm gonna read you several lines. Purge me with hyssop. Hyssop was like a branch, like a bush. Wipe me clean, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones you have broken rejoice. The bones you've broken? I feel so crushed by my own failure. I feel like my bones are broken. God, would you please let them come back to life? Hide your face from my sin and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. 2 more verses. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Don't leave me on my own. Don't take the Holy Spirit away. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and uphold me with a willing spirit. Here's David on the back end of one of his greatest failures that here we are thousands of years later still talking about as a reference point for abuse of power and all kinds of issues. And what he's doing is he's going to God and saying, God, I've sinned against you. I've sinned against you. And in that, only you can restore me and put me back in the driver's seat. So Dad, as a father, as a husband, that spirit and that attitude of asking God to keep us in his fold and to put us back on the right track, that's the spirit in which I want to talk about this week's mission. Hey Dad, so probably I'm gonna take a guess, either last week, last 7 days, or this week, the next 7 days, in that 14-day time span, somehow you're gonna blow it. Or you already blew it. It could be little, it could be big. Maybe it's you told your kid you'd pick them up after that practice and you were late, or maybe it was you told your wife you'd do that thing and you forgot. Whatever it is, could be small, could be really big. Maybe we caught you at a moment where you're walking through a big, massive meltdown. What I want you to know is I want you to know that you're not alone. That kind of failure, that kind of mistake is something we've all experienced. And now you have a choice to make. The choice to make is, do you lean into God in the midst of your failure, or do you run away from God in the midst of your failure? And like David in Psalm 51, he leaned in. He asked God to restore him. So here's my question for you, and my mission I want to send you on this week is, when you fail, I want you to take that Psalm 51 attitude and lean in to God this week, so that you become the guy who fails, leans into God, fails, leans into God. And that becomes the pattern, the way of your life. Do that this week, Dad, because you're not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose.